3. AM 16 cement trucks roll down Willowbrook Lane, headlights cutting through darkness, stopping at my backyard creek, the one flowing behind their $1,000,000 McMansions. HOA queen. Karen stands there in yoga pants and pearls, supervising like a general.
This ugly creek ends tonight,
she chirps.
No more swamp water ruining our property values.
Manicured nails point, hoses roar, gray concrete floods in, burying decades of clear-flowing water under industrial sludge. What would you do if neighbors spent $100,000 to concrete over nature just because it didn't match their perfect lawns? I sat on my porch swing, coffee steaming, watching them bury my creek. All I could think was, wait until the storm season hits. They have no idea what they're about to lose. Team Creek or Team McMansions? Drop your choice below, because what happened to their $1,000,000 homes made national news. My name's Ezra Blackwood, 58 years old, 30 years as a master plumber, and I know two things for certain. Water always wins, and rich people always think they're smarter than physics. I bought the problem house on Willowbrook Lane after the previous owners fled. Real estate agent called it a drainage challenge, code for sometimes floods, good luck sucker. $180,000 for a cottage surrounded by $1,000,000 McMansions that sprouted like expensive weeds after 2018. Every morning I'd sit on my back porch, black coffee steaming, listening to the creek babble over century-old stones. That sound reminded me of Sarah, my late wife, who called running water nature's lullaby. The creek smell mixed with wildflowers, real, honest scents that money can't manufacture. Uphill, chemical lawn treatments and fresh mulch, the artificial suburban smell of people trying to control Mother Nature with credit cards. Then I met the neighborhood dictator, Brittany Ashford. Picture a Karen with a real estate license and delusions of grandeur. 42, permanently dressed in workout gear she never sweated in, driving a white BMW like she owned the whole street. Voice like a dental drill wrapped in fake sweetness. 3 weeks after moving in, she appeared at my door with that practiced smile that screams, "I want something." Welcome to Willowbrook Estates. I'm Brittany, HOA president. Her eyes swept my property like a home appraiser. We maintain certain standards here. Your backyard situation is becoming problematic. What situation? That swampy area behind your house. It's creating drainage issues and, frankly, lowering everyone's property values. Swampy area. She meant the crystal-clear creek that had been managing this hillside's drainage since her great-grandparents were kids. Ma'am, this creek handles runoff for the entire neighborhood. Without it, you'd have real drainage problems. Her smile turned arctic. Ezra, we're a community. Sometimes individual preferences must yield to collective needs. 2 days later, my first violation notice. Failure to maintain landscaping standards, Section 4.7. $50 fine, 10 days to comply. I spent that evening reading HOA documents with a magnifying glass and growing amusement. The CC&Rs were obsessive about grass height and mailbox colors, but said absolutely nothing about natural waterways. Because the original developers weren't morons, they built around the creek intentionally. This wasn't about landscaping standards, this was about a control freak who thought her checkbook could redesign geology. The creek itself was a masterpiece. During dry spells, water trickled quietly between moss-covered rocks. Spring rains? It swelled into a perfect drainage channel, carrying runoff safely away from $1,000,000 foundations. Every curve, every pool, carved by decades of water physics. But physics doesn't photograph well for real estate brochures. That night, I called my neighbor Margaret Bellamy, 73, widow, lived here before the McMansion invasion. "Brittany's been harassing you too?" she whispered over the fence. "She made me replace my perfectly good deck last year, $12,000 because she claimed it was structurally unsound." Was it? 20-year-old pressure-treated lumber solid as a rock, but she threatened daily fines until I caved. The pattern was becoming clear. Brittany used HOA rules like a weapon, targeting anyone who didn't fit her suburban fantasy. Elderly residents, modest homes, anything that reminded buyers this neighborhood had existed before her husband started building his overpriced monuments to middle-class insecurity. But here's what she didn't know about plumbers. We understand pressure. We know that when you block one pipe, that pressure builds up somewhere else. And we're really patient about watching what happens next. Looking back, I should have warned her that creeks are just pipes that Mother Nature installed herself. But honestly, After 30 years of fixing other people's improvements to perfectly functional systems, I was curious to see what happened when someone tried to improve on a few million years of hydraulic engineering. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came the rains that would teach Brittany her first lesson in hydrology, though she was too stubborn to learn it. March brought 3 days of steady downpour. Nothing unusual for our area, just normal seasonal runoff that my creek handled like a champ. But suddenly, Willowbrook Lane had a flooding crisis. Water pooled around decorative fountains, a few basement window wells collected puddles, and the Hendersons' driveway sprouted a temporary stream. Brittany called an emergency HOA meeting faster than you could say special assessment. I showed up out of curiosity, sitting in the back while she clicked through 37 slides of wet pavement and soggy mulch. The presentation title, Drainage Crisis, Immediate Action Required. As you can see, she announced to the dozen residents who'd bothered to show up, our neighborhood is experiencing unprecedented flooding due to inadequate drainage management. The irony was thick enough to cut with a shovel. Slide 23 showed my creek running full but clear, carrying runoff like it had for decades. Slide 24 showed water pooling around the Hendersons' decorative fountain, built right where a natural drainage swale used to flow before they improved it with concrete and river rocks. From my plumbing days, I remembered the old-timer who taught me, son, when you see water where it shouldn't be, look for what somebody moved that used to be there. The Hendersons' flooding wasn't a mystery. They'd buried their natural drainage under landscaping. The source of our problem, Brittany continued, laser pointer dancing across photos of my property, is this uncontrolled water feature overwhelming our engineered systems. That's when Harold Vance cleared his throat. 70 years old, county drainage engineer for 3 decades, and the only person in that room who actually understood how water moved through soil. Brittany, that creek's been handling drainage since before these houses existed. Block it, and you'll create real flooding problems. Her smile could have frozen boiling water. Harold, we've consulted with drainage professionals. I am a drainage professional. Spent 30 years fixing problems caused by people who thought they were smarter than gravity. The room went quiet except for coffee percolating and rain tapping windows. Outside, you could hear my creek doing its century-old job, moving water safely away from everyone's foundations. But here's where things got interesting. While Harold lectured about respecting natural drainage, I spotted something through the community center window that made my plumber instincts tingle. Brittany's husband's construction trailer parked behind the Johnsons' house, with workers unloading what looked like emergency drainage equipment. After the meeting, Harold walked home with me, his engineer's eye tracing the creek's natural path. She's planning something stupid, he said, running weathered hands along the creek bank. I've seen this before. Rich folks move somewhere, decide Mother Nature needs improvement. What usually happens? Expensive education in physics. 2 weeks later, the first salvo arrived. A city complaint claiming I'd built an illegal dam structure, causing neighborhood flooding. The beautiful irony? The woman whose husband built houses with substandard drainage was blaming a natural creek for water problems. City Inspector Dave Morrison showed up looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. 30 years of municipal service teaches you to spot neighborhood drama from orbit. So where's this illegal dam? He asked, surveying my perfectly normal backyard. Those rocks, I pointed to the creek's natural stone bottom. Dave pulled off his glasses, cleaned them slowly, put them back on. Lady complained about rocks that have been here since the Eisenhower administration. His inspection took an hour, photographing, measuring flow rates, checking elevations. His report was pure poetry. Natural waterway predates development, provides essential watershed drainage, no permit-required structures present. But while Dave worked, I made a discovery that changed everything. Walking the creek's path upstream, I found fresh concrete footings where the expensive houses connected to the storm system. Hasty work, like emergency repairs, the kind you do when your original drainage was inadequate and spring rains exposed the problem. That evening, Margaret Bellamy called with Garden Club intelligence that confirmed my suspicions. Brittany's been telling everyone your creek caused their foundation problems, she whispered. But the Washingtons discovered basement leaks that predate any creek issues. The Johnsons' garage slab has cracks they've been hiding with strategic car parking. the real picture was emerging. These million-dollar houses had drainage problems from day one, built too close to the water table with minimal storm management. But it's easier to blame the eccentric neighbor with the swamp cottage than admit your husband's construction company cut corners on expensive but invisible infrastructure. That night, I sat on my porch listening to water flow steadily over stones, carrying away the day's rain just like it had when this was all farmland. Somewhere uphill, sump pumps hummed overtime in basements that should never have been built so deep. Brittany wanted a war with my creek, but she didn't realize she was actually fighting a battle against physics itself, and physics had never lost a fight. Brittany's revenge arrived in my mailbox like a paper avalanche, 6 HOA violations in 2 weeks that would have made a Soviet bureaucrat weep with pride. Violation 1, grass exceeds maximum height per section 3.2. I measured my lawn myself, 2 3/4 inches. The maximum, 3 inches. Apparently my grass was a 1/4 inch too ambitious. Violation 2, mailbox color non-compliant with architectural standards. My black mailbox, the same black mailbox that came with the house, approved under guidelines specifying earth tones or black. The smell of fresh citation paper became a daily occurrence, like getting served legal documents by a suburban warlord with a laminator addiction. By week 6, I owed $2,300 in fines for infractions that existed only in Brittany's imagination. But here's what she didn't know about my 30 years fixing pipes under bureaucratic noses. Documentation beats intimidation every single time. Memorial Day weekend, I played neighborhood photographer, documenting every violation Brittany claimed I'd committed. The Henderson's grass, 3.5 inches of shameful non-compliance. Johnson's mailbox, sun-faded brown that hadn't been regulation earth tone since Bush Sr. was president. The Washington's decorative fountain, twice the size of my unsightly water feature. My old union steward used to say, when management makes up rules to screw you, make them follow their own rules to screw themselves. Selective enforcement isn't just unfair, it's legally actionable. But Brittany was just warming up. Tuesday morning brought the sound that makes every homeowner's blood run cold. Chainsaws at dawn. Through my kitchen window, I watched an unmarked tree crew trimming ancient oak branches that had shaded my creek for decades. The crew boss looked like he'd rather be anywhere else when I approached. "Sorry about this, sir. We were told these branches were dead and hazardous." "Dead? They were budding last week." He glanced around nervously. "Look, lady in the white BMW said make it look like storm damage. We're just following orders." Storm damage. Because apparently 40-year-old oak limbs spontaneously decide to commit suicide just to spite the HOA. The environmental impact was immediate. Without leaf cover, creek water warmed faster, algae bloomed thicker, and 40 years of natural shade patterns got chainsawed into suburban conformity. It was ecological vandalism disguised as tree maintenance. That evening, Margaret Bellamy appeared at my door with homemade cookies and whispered intelligence from the neighborhood underground. "They did the same thing to me," she confided, checking over her shoulder like Brittany might materialize from the azaleas. "Forced me to replace a perfectly good deck because it was structurally unsound. $12,000 for 20-year-old pressure-treated lumber that could have supported a tank. Was it actually dangerous? Rock solid. But Brittany threatened daily fines until I caved. Fixed income versus unlimited legal harassment. Guess who wins?" The pattern was becoming clear. Brittany used HOA rules like a medieval siege weapon, targeting anyone who didn't fit her McMansion fantasy. Elderly residents, modest homes, natural features, anything that reminded buyers this place had history before her husband's construction company arrived. Then came her masterpiece, an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Christmas Eve to vote on an $85,000 drainage improvement project. The proposal read like bureaucratic poetry: channel all runoff into concrete culverts, bypass the troublesome creek entirely, install modern storm management split equally among homeowners as a special assessment. Christmas Eve, 6 p.m., minimal notice, maximum manipulation. 7 board members present, 2 actual residents who'd rather be home wrapping presents, and proxy votes from members I'd never seen breathing. The vote passed 7-2 faster than holiday eggnog disappears at office parties. But here's where my weekend detective work paid off. That night, I cross-referenced the voter list with county property records while sipping leftover Christmas coffee. Two proxy voters had moved to Florida months ago. The meeting notice violated the 30-day advance requirement, and the quorum needed 15 actual residents, not phantom votes from people enjoying retirement in warmer climates. From union contract fights, I knew that when people break their own rules, those broken rules become legal weapons. The vote was invalid, but Brittany was already ordering concrete trucks. The next morning I called Jim Martinez, the lawyer who'd handled Sarah's estate. Environmental law wasn't his specialty, but he understood when people ignored contracts. Ezra, they can't just disregard their own governing documents. If HOA rules bind you, they bind everyone. What about destroying the creek? Natural waterways fall under state environmental protection. Penalties start at $25,000 per day for unpermitted alterations. I spent New Year's Eve reading environmental statutes by lamplight, learning that what Brittany planned wasn't just stupid, it was federally illegal. But she'd already scheduled the concrete pour for January 15th. The woman was about to commit an environmental crime and send me the bill for it. Sometimes the best revenge is just watching someone outsmart themselves. January 15th arrived with the kind of gray sky that makes bad decisions look even worse. At 5 a.m., diesel engines rumbled down Willowbrook Lane like an invasion force. 16 cement trucks forming a concrete convoy to destroy what nature had spent centuries perfecting. The sound hit you in the chest, all roar and exhaust, drowning out the gentle creek babble that had been this hillside soundtrack since before anyone's grandparents were born. Brittany stood in my backyard conducting her environmental orchestra, designer boots planted in creekside mud, clipboard waving like a baton. That smile of someone who thinks they've just checkmated Mother Nature herself. "Morning, Ezra," she chirped with weapon-grade cheerfulness. "Hope you don't mind the early start. This improvement will benefit everyone." I sipped coffee and watched her point manicured nails at water patterns older than the Constitution, directing contractors to bury living ecology under industrial concrete. The mixers roared to life, their grinding mechanical sound replacing the creek's natural music. The first pour hit the water like gray lava, covering stones polished smooth by decades of natural flow. Tadpoles and salamanders that had called this creek home suddenly found themselves swimming in liquid rock that would harden into their tomb. Within hours, they'd transformed a living waterway into a concrete drainage ditch. The smell changed from clean water and moss to diesel exhaust and curing cement, like someone had poured industrial soup over a natural cathedral. From 30 years of plumbing, I knew what Brittany didn't. Concrete doesn't absorb water, it redirects pressure. Every drop that used to soak naturally into creekside soil would now hit that concrete surface and ricochet somewhere else. Physics doesn't care about your property values. The entertainment started immediately. That same afternoon, I watched the first test of Brittany's engineering genius. A brief winter shower hit the fresh concrete, and water that should have infiltrated slowly into natural creek bed instead bounced off like it was hitting a sidewalk. The runoff shot straight into Brittany's own foundation plantings, pooling around expensive landscaping that had never seen standing water before. Her prize azaleas suddenly found themselves growing in an accidental swamp. By week 2, the consequences were spreading like ripples from a dropped stone. The Henderson's decorative fountain, which had never overflowed in 5 years, suddenly couldn't handle runoff that used to disappear into creekside soil. Water backed up into their flagstone patio, creating puddles where they'd never existed. Johnson's French drains, hastily installed last year to address mysterious moisture issues, started bubbling like champagne fountains. Turns out when you eliminate natural drainage and force everything through artificial channels, you overwhelm systems that were already struggling. But the most beautiful irony was Brittany's own basement. For the first time since construction, her window wells collected standing water. The concrete channel was working exactly as designed. Unfortunately, she'd forgotten to calculate where that redirected water would end up. Within a month, reality started writing checks that concrete couldn't cash. Hairline cracks appeared in 3 driveways, spiderwebbing across surfaces that had been solid for years. Pool decks settled unevenly, creating gaps between slabs that looked like miniature earthquake damage. The neighborhood's new soundtrack became concrete popping during temperature changes and metal groaning as rebar stressed under shifting foundations. From my sump pump installation days, I recognized the classic signs of hydrostatic pressure building underground. Clay soil acts like a sponge until it reaches saturation, then becomes as unstable as pudding. Brittany had eliminated the natural release valve that kept soil moisture balanced for generations. Her response was predictably delusional. She hired landscapers to plant fast-growing shrubs around foundation cracks, hoping to hide evidence before it became neighborhood gossip. "Just normal settling," she announced at February's sparsely attended HOA meeting. "Luxury homes experiencing minor cosmetic adjustments." Cosmetic adjustments, like calling the Hindenburg's Landing a minor parking issue. Meanwhile, 3 families quietly listed their homes, pricing them to move before foundation problems became impossible to conceal. Real estate agents started using creative language like mature drainage characteristics and unique water features. But here's where Brittany's concrete victory became her legal nightmare. I was documenting everything. Every crack, every settlement pattern, every new pooling location got photographed with timestamps and detailed notes. Harold, my engineer neighbor, was helping me understand what we were recording. Progressive structural damage directly traceable to eliminating natural drainage. From my union days fighting contract violations, I knew documentation beats denial every time. My lawyer had suggested keeping records, and my camera was building a federal case one photo at a time. That concrete pour hadn't solved Brittany's drainage problem. It had created environmental evidence that regulatory agencies take very personally. By early March, I had 6 weeks of documented proof showing how concrete creek destruction caused measurable structural damage to multiple properties. Spring storm season was still 8 weeks away, and Brittany's concrete channel was already failing its basic function. I couldn't wait to see what happened when Mother Nature really started testing her engineering genius. The truth hit me while I was elbow-deep in Margaret Bellamy's leaky kitchen faucet, surrounded by the smell of old pipe compound and fresh coffee. "You know what's funny about Brittany's husband?" Margaret said, handing me a dish towel. "My daughter works at the county recorder's office. Says she's been seeing his name on some very interesting paperwork lately." My wrench stopped mid-turn. "What kind of paperwork?" "Construction liens, a whole stack of them." That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse for the first time since Sarah's estate paperwork. Public records are like plumbing blueprints. If you know how to read them, they show you exactly where the problems are hiding. What I found made my blood pressure spike in the best possible way. Ashford Construction, Brittany's husband's company, had built our entire neighborhood plus 3 others, all showcasing the same corner-cutting signature: minimal drainage infrastructure masked by expensive surface finishes. The financial picture was even juicier. Rick Ashford owed $3.2 million on construction loans for 3 unsold lots, with payments restructured twice in 18 months. From my contractor days, I knew the golden rule. When builders cut costs, they start with what buyers can't see. Drainage, foundation work, structural supports, all the expensive underground stuff that's invisible during model home tours. But here's where it got beautiful. The original 2017 engineering survey for Willowbrook Estates specifically noted my creek as essential drainage feature, not to be altered without comprehensive stormwater management upgrades. Rick Ashford had built around that creek intentionally, using it as free drainage infrastructure for the entire development. Every foundation, every street drain, every landscaping plan assumed that natural waterway would handle runoff forever. The concrete pour wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics. It was about burying evidence of substandard drainage that was killing his property sales. The insurance angle made it even better. Margaret's daughter had glimpsed HOA liability policies that excluded soil movement and gradual settling, standard language that becomes expensive when foundations shift due to drainage elimination. Individual homeowner policies carried identical exclusions. Nobody was covered for structural damage from eliminated natural drainage systems. From years of water damage insurance fights, I knew the difference between sudden and gradual damage determines everything. Burst pipes get covered, slow foundation settling doesn't. Homeowners would eat the entire cost while Ashford Construction stayed legally protected. The scheme was elegant in its cynicism. Build houses with marginal drainage, use natural creek as backup system, eliminate creek when it conflicts with sales marketing, then let individual homeowners absorb financial liability for resulting structural problems. But Rick Ashford had made one critical miscalculation. Federal environmental law doesn't negotiate with local financial arrangements. That evening, I spread the courthouse documents across my kitchen table like evidence in a murder trial. The paper smelled like bureaucracy and broken promises, but it painted a clear picture of systematic fraud disguised as neighborhood improvement. I called Jim Martinez with my discoveries. If they altered protected waterways to hide construction deficiencies, that's environmental violation plus potential fraud. EPA penalties start at $25,000 per day for unpermitted stream alteration. What about homeowners dealing with foundation damage? If they can prove problems stem from creek elimination that violated original engineering specifications, they've got significant damages claims. I spent that night cross-referencing development plans with actual construction, highlighting discrepancies by lamplight. The gaps between what was planned and what was built became obvious once you understood the financial pressure driving corner-cutting decisions. Spring storm season was 5 weeks away, and I finally understood what was coming. All that water pressure, redirected from natural absorption into overloaded artificial systems, meeting foundations designed around drainage infrastructure that no longer existed. Rick Ashford had turned my neighborhood into a geological time bomb, then lit the fuse himself by destroying its natural safety valve. March brought the kind of crisp morning air that makes you want to build something, or in my case, document everything before Mother Nature finished what Brittany started. My first recruit was Dr. Sarah Kim from the County Community College. I'd met her during a municipal drainage consultation, and environmental science professors have two things in common. They love real-world disasters, and they hate watching ecosystems murdered by suburban arrogance. Someone concreted over a natural creek without permits? Her voice carried the academic fury that makes tenure committees nervous. Ezra, my students would kill for a case study this blatant. Within days, my backyard transformed into an environmental crime scene investigation. 5 graduate students with equipment worth more than my truck, measuring soil permeability and installing monitoring devices that looked like they belonged on Mars. The science was beautiful in its simplicity. They used piezometers, fancy wells that measure underground water pressure, to document how creek elimination affected subsurface hydrology. Every reading confirmed what 30 years of plumbing had taught me: eliminate drainage, create pressure, wait for expensive problems. The students' data read like a disaster prediction. Soil saturation up 40%, hydrostatic pressure building at foundation level, water table rising toward the surface like a geological time bomb with a timer nobody could see. Dr. Kim translated their findings into language that would make insurance adjusters weep. Eliminating natural drainage creates measurable geological instability with predictable, progressive, and legally documentable consequences. While college kids played with their science toys, I was building my own evidence collection. Every morning at 6 a.m., coffee steaming in the cool air, I photographed the same 12 locations around the neighborhood. Foundation cracks spreading like spider webs, water pooling in places that had been dry for decades, the concrete channel failing spectacularly during even modest rainfall. The photography became my morning meditation, watching expensive mistakes reveal themselves one click at a time. From construction work, I knew foundation problems follow patterns as predictable as water flowing downhill. Meanwhile, Margaret Bellamy was running what she called coffee meetings, but what looked suspiciously like intelligence operations that would have impressed the FBI. Her kitchen table became mission control, covered with photographs of cracked driveways, mysterious basement stains, and settlement patterns that told the story of systematically failing infrastructure. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with musty water damage paperwork created the unique aroma of suburban revolution. 5 families were documenting significant structural damage. Henderson's pool deck had tilted 3 inches, turning their backyard oasis into a geometric nightmare. Johnson's garage floor sprouted cracks wide enough to lose car keys in. Even the pristine Washington house was developing stress fractures around windows like architectural wrinkles. But my favorite alliance came from the most unexpected source, the private investigator Brittany hired to destroy me. Detective Mike Torres knocked on my door Tuesday evening, looking like he'd rather be getting root canal surgery. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to come clean. Mrs. Ashford hired me to dig up dirt on you. Financial problems, criminal history, anything to torpedo you in court. Find anything juicy?" He laughed like someone who'd spent 20 years investigating suburban drama. 30 years of steady employment, taxes paid on time, wife who died of cancer, 0 debt, spotless record. You're literally the most boring surveillance target in my career. So why the house call? 2 reasons. First, I live in an HOA nightmare myself, so I recognize the playbook. Rich people with buyer's remorse blaming individuals for systemic failures. He pulled out a thick manila folder. Second, she's 3 weeks behind on my invoices, which suggests her financial problems run deeper than advertised. Mike's photos revealed the scope of Brittany's desperation campaign. Surveillance of my daily routine, documentation of every visitor, pictures of my garbage cans on collection day, the paranoid behavior of someone hunting for ammunition that didn't exist. But the folder contained something far more valuable: photographs of construction shortcuts throughout the neighborhood. Missing drainage infrastructure, substandard foundation work, corners cut in ways that would make building inspectors reach for their citation books. She wanted dirt on you, Mike explained. Professional habit made me photograph everything I saw. Turns out her husband's shoddy construction is way more interesting than your perfectly boring life. That evening, I spread the evidence across my kitchen table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle solving itself. College research, daily documentation, private investigator photos, all pointing to the same conclusion. Systematic construction deficiencies had been masked by natural drainage that compensated for inadequate infrastructure. Eliminating that drainage exposed the original problems while creating new ones. Storm season was 3 weeks away, and I had scientific documentation, legal evidence, and photographic proof of what was coming. All I needed was front row seats and popcorn for the most expensive physics lesson Willowbrook Estates would ever receive. April brought the kind of desperation that makes rich people do stupid things in broad daylight. Brittany's insurance adjuster delivered the news that shattered her suburban fantasy. Foundation damage from eliminated natural drainage wasn't covered under standard homeowner policies. Repair estimates ranged from $45,000 to $80,000 per affected house, and special assessments would bankrupt half the neighborhood. I watched her receive that news from my kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, as she stood in her tilting driveway reading the adjuster's report. Her face went through the 5 stages of grief in 30 seconds, landing on rage with the intensity of a kitchen fire. That's when the gloves came off. Tuesday morning, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. My expensive monitoring equipment, 3 months of college research data, lay scattered across the backyard like expensive electronic confetti. The cameras I'd installed to document daily changes, smashed with what looked like a golf club based on the distinctive dent patterns in the metal housings. But here's where Brittany's desperation made her sloppy. I'd learned from my union days to always have backup systems. Hidden cameras captured the entire vandalism incident, including clear shots of the white BMW parked at the property line and figures in distinctive workout gear wielding sporting goods like weapons. The character assassination campaign escalated to neighborhood-wide psychological warfare. Anonymous flyers appeared on every doorstep, printed on expensive paper that smelled like desperation and legal liability. "Warning: Unstable neighbor threatens property values," read the headline, followed by claims that I was mentally unwell and obsessed with environmental conspiracies. The flyer described my documentation efforts as dangerous surveillance and warned families with children about my erratic behavior. 3 families received personal visits from Brittany who whispered concerns about their elderly neighbor's declining mental state and suggested they avoid contact for their own safety. The campaign had all the subtlety of a suburban inquisition, complete with concerned citizen theater and manufactured fear. But Margaret Bellamy had been through HOA warfare before, and she wasn't buying the performance. "Honey, I've lived through McCarthyism and 3 different HOA presidents," she told me over coffee while examining the vandalism photos. "When people start calling you crazy for documenting their crimes, you know you're over the target." The bribery attempt came wrapped in designer diplomacy and delivered during the dinner hour. Rick Ashford knocked on my door carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of nervous smile that comes with felony-level conversations. His cologne couldn't quite mask the scent of financial panic that follows construction executives when their shortcuts become public knowledge. "Ezra, we need to talk man-to-man about this neighborhood situation," he said, setting the briefcase on my kitchen table with the reverence reserved for explosive devices. "I think we can find a solution that benefits everyone involved." Inside, $50,000 in neatly banded hundreds, plus paperwork for a relocation assistance package that would help me find housing better suited to your lifestyle preferences. "Son, you can't buy your way out of the laws of physics," I told him, closing the briefcase without touching the money. "That creek's been handling this watershed since your great-grandfather was in diapers. Concrete doesn't change geology." His face went through several color changes before settling on a shade that matched his financial prospects. "Look, we both know this situation has gotten out of hand. Maybe we can work together to find a reasonable compromise." "Already found one. Wait for the next big storm and let Mother Nature explain hydrology to your insurance company." Legal intimidation followed the failed bribery like storm clouds after barometric pressure drops. The HOA attorney, a sharp-dressed shark who smelled like expensive cologne and billable hours, delivered foreclosure threats over $8,700 in accumulated fines. But here's what happens when you try to intimidate someone who's spent 30 years dealing with building inspectors, union bosses, and municipal bureaucrats. You discover that proper documentation beats legal theater every single time. My countersuit, filed through Jim Martinez, cited harassment, environmental damage, selective enforcement, and violation of federal clean water statutes. The filing fee was $285. The potential damages started at $500,000 and included punitive measures that would make the HOA board personally liable for environmental restoration costs. The smear campaign backfired spectacularly when neighbors started comparing Brittany's claims with observable reality. Hard to call someone mentally unstable when their predictions about foundation damage keep proving accurate while your own house develops new cracks weekly. 2 more board members quietly resigned, citing philosophical differences about neighborhood management, which translated to, "I don't want my name on federal environmental violations when the EPA shows up." But the physical intimidation revealed just how desperate things had gotten. Late-night cars idling outside my house with headlights aimed at bedroom windows, anonymous phone calls featuring heavy breathing and vague threats about accidents happening to troublemakers. The security system I'd installed captured license plates registered to current board members, evidence of systematic harassment that would make criminal prosecutors very interested in expanding their case files. Spring storm season was 2 weeks away, and Brittany's desperation was accelerating faster than her foundation was settling. May arrived with the meteorological equivalent of a loaded weapon. Drought-stressed soil followed by severe thunderstorm warnings that made the National Weather Service sound like they were announcing the apocalypse. Summer storm season in our region means months of explosive weather patterns that test infrastructure the way stress tests reveal heart problems. But this year carried special significance. Clay soil that had been destabilized by eliminated drainage, foundations built assuming natural water management that no longer existed, and a concrete channel system designed by someone who thought physics was negotiable. The structural failures accelerated like dominoes falling in slow motion. Brittany's front steps separated from her house foundation, creating a gap wide enough to lose small pets in. 3 driveways now sported cracks that looked like geological fault lines, and the Henderson's pool deck had tilted to an angle that made swimming feel like a maritime disaster simulation. The sound of shifting concrete became Willowbrook Lane's new soundtrack, metallic groaning from stressed rebar, popping noises during temperature changes, and the occasional crack that made homeowners jump like they'd heard gunshots. The smell of foundations settling mixed concrete dust with that distinctive musty scent of water where it shouldn't be. But the cover-up was becoming impossible to maintain. City Building Inspector Dave Morrison red-tagged 2 houses as structurally unsafe pending engineering evaluation, which in municipal language means get out before it falls down. Emergency repair estimates now exceeded $150,000 per affected home, turning the neighborhood into a financial disaster zone disguised as suburban paradise. Media attention intensified when Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 arrived with a camera crew and the kind of investigative hunger that makes local politicians nervous. Environmental disasters photograph beautifully from aerial drones, especially when you can contrast natural creek areas upstream with concrete wasteland and flooded foundations downstream. Her on-camera expert interview with Dr. Kim delivered the scientific verdict in terms viewers could understand. Eliminating natural drainage creates hydraulic pressure that has to go somewhere. These homeowners essentially turned their neighborhood into a geological pressure cooker. Brittany's final desperate gambit was pinning responsibility on municipal engineering failure, claiming the city required creek concrete installation for compliance with updated drainage codes. The false narrative might have worked if I hadn't preserved the original permits showing no such requirements existed. But here's where federal enforcement transformed neighborhood drama into national news. EPA Environmental Protection Specialist Janet Rodriguez arrived with credentials that made local officials very nervous, and equipment that could measure environmental damage down to the molecular level. Her preliminary findings read like an indictment: unpermitted alteration of natural waterway resulting in measurable ecosystem destruction and predictable geological instability. Violations include Clean Water Act Section 404, state stream alteration statutes, and potential obstruction of federal environmental investigation. The community revolt reached critical mass when 15 families demanded an emergency HOA meeting to remove the entire board. Brittany lost majority control as proxy votes got invalidated, and residents discovered that HOA rules actually worked both ways when properly enforced. The new board's first action was ceasing all legal harassment against me and hiring an environmental attorney to assess restoration requirements before federal fines accumulated into foreclosure-inducing territory. But Mother Nature had her own timeline, and she wasn't waiting for legal proceedings. The National Weather Service issued flash flood warnings for our region. 4 to 6 inches of rain expected in a 3-hour window, with potential for isolated areas to receive 8+ inches. Weather that would test even properly designed drainage systems, let alone concrete channels built by someone who thought hydrology was optional. I spent the evening calibrating my remaining monitoring equipment and positioning cameras for maximum documentation value. 30 years of plumbing had taught me to respect water pressure. It always finds the weakest point and exploits it with ruthless efficiency. The weather forecast sounded like a biblical prediction. Severe thunderstorms developing after midnight, heavy rainfall rates possible, urban flooding likely in areas with poor drainage. The radar showed a weather system that looked like Mother Nature's final exam for Brittany's engineering theories. Rick Ashford made one last desperate appearance, showing up at my door with legal papers and the kind of panicked expression that comes with federal investigators asking uncomfortable questions about construction shortcuts. "We're prepared to offer full restoration of the original creek, plus compensation for any inconvenience this situation may have caused," he said, hands shaking like he was detoxing from confidence. "Bit late for that conversation," I replied, watching lightning flicker in the distance. "Weather Service says the storm hits in 6 hours. Your concrete channel's about to get its final performance review." I spent that evening sitting on my porch, listening to thunder roll across the horizon like artillery fire. Somewhere in the distance, weather was gathering to deliver a physics lesson that would cost Willowbrook Estates more than all their construction shortcuts had saved. The reckoning was finally coming, and it would be measured in gallons per minute. The storm arrived at 2:47 a.m. with the fury of a geological lawsuit delivered by clouds. Thunder shook windows hard enough to rattle picture frames, while rain hammered the concrete creek channel like machine gun fire against a bunker. Within the first hour, water was backing up faster than Brittany's excuses, rising 3 feet above normal creek level with nowhere to infiltrate naturally. I sat on my covered porch with black coffee and a front row seat to the most expensive hydrology lesson in county history. My cameras captured every minute of water rising, pooling, and finding creative ways to remind the neighborhood that physics doesn't negotiate with property values. The concrete channel, designed to handle normal drainage, proved as effective as a screen door on a submarine when confronted with actual storm volumes. Water shot out of the artificial stream bed like a fire hose, flooding landscaping that had never seen standing water in 5 years of homeownership. Sarah Martinez was broadcasting live from our flooded street by 4 a.m., her camera crew documenting disaster in real time for the early morning news audience. The aerial footage was cinematically perfect. Natural creek areas upstream handling the storm beautifully, while downstream concrete zones created an instant swamp that looked like environmental revenge served ice cold. "This is exactly what happens when you fight natural hydrology, Doctor," Kim explained during the live interview, standing ankle-deep in water that used to be Brittany's prize-winning front lawn. "Water always finds a way, and elimination of natural drainage creates pressure that has to go somewhere." Then came the moment that would make national news. At 5:23 a.m. during live television coverage, Brittany's house foundation shifted 8 inches with a grinding sound that the camera microphones picked up perfectly. The visual was devastating, expensive landscaping washing away, foundation separating from the structure, and her white BMW floating in what used to be a driveway, but now resembled a suburban lake. Windows cracked with sharp popping sounds that punctuated Sarah Martinez's live narration. The sprinkler system burst, creating fountains in places where fountains were never intended. Water poured into basement windows like the house was actively trying to become a submarine. Fire department evacuation orders arrived with sirens and flashing lights that looked like a disaster movie premiere. 4 houses red-tagged as structurally unsafe, families carrying children through ankle-deep water, and Red Cross shelter established at the community center for displaced residents. But the confrontation that made YouTube history happened during live television coverage. Brittany emerged from her tilting house wearing a bathrobe and the kind of rage that comes from watching physics destroy your life savings in real time. She stormed through floodwater toward my porch, screaming loud enough for the TV microphones to capture every word. "This is your fault," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger that shook with fury. "Your crazy environmental obsession destroyed our neighborhood." The camera crew followed her dramatic march through floodwater, creating footage that would be shared 500,000 times within 24 hours. Sarah Martinez, professional enough to recognize television gold when she saw it, let the confrontation play out live. "Ma'am, I didn't make it rain," I replied calmly, sipping coffee while water lapped at my porch steps. "I just understood where the water would go when you eliminated the drainage system that managed it for the past century. You sabotaged our drainage improvements. You caused this flooding with your interference." The beauty of live television is that lies get exposed in real time. EPA environmental specialist Janet Rodriguez, who'd arrived during the storm to document federal violations, stepped into camera range with scientific authority that made Brittany's hysteria look even more unhinged. "Sir, your predictions about eliminated drainage creating structural instability proved completely accurate," Rodriguez said, addressing me while ignoring Brittany's continued ranting. "This represents textbook examples of how not to manage watershed systems." The legal resolution happened faster than floodwater receding. Federal enforcement action filed within hours, $2.8 million in potential Clean Water Act fines, and environmental restoration requirements that would make the neighborhood's financial problems look like pocket change. Margaret Bellamy, standing on her own flooded porch, delivered the community reckoning that completed Brittany's public humiliation. Maybe next time we should listen to the plumber who actually understands how water works, instead of the real estate lady who thinks Mother Nature takes suggestions. The viral footage spread across social media with captions like "Karen versus physics" and "When HOAs attack nature." Environmental engineering programs started using our disaster as a case study in what happens when developers prioritize aesthetics over hydrology. By dawn, Willowbrook Lane looked like a war zone where physics had won decisively. Emergency vehicles, news crews, displaced families, and one very satisfied retired plumber who just watched 30 years of construction experience vindicated by Mother Nature herself. The reckoning was complete, and it had been beautiful. 3 months after Mother Nature's final exam, Willowbrook Lane looked like a completely different neighborhood, and not just because of the construction equipment parked everywhere. Federal Court Judge Patricia Wong ordered complete creek restoration within 90 days, environmental impact mitigation, and penalties that hit the HOA with a special assessment of $127,000 per household. The ruling read like poetry for anyone who'd ever been bullied by suburban authoritarianism. Natural waterways predate human development and must be preserved according to federal environmental statute, regardless of local aesthetic preferences. Brittany's family was among the first casualties of financial reality. Their house, condemned as structurally unsafe, sold at auction for 60% of its original price. Last I heard, they'd moved to a rental apartment complex with rules against modifying natural drainage, irony served with a side of monthly lease payments. But the real victory was watching the neighborhood transform from a place ruled by fear into an actual community. Margaret Bellamy became the new HOA president, elected on a platform of environmental stewardship and common sense governance. Her first board meeting featured actual coffee instead of bottled water, and discussions about rain gardens instead of violation quotas. The musty smell of fear was replaced by the fresh scent of possibility. The creek restoration became a masterpiece of environmental engineering. Professional hydrologists designed natural retention areas that could handle 100-year storm events, native plant restoration that brought back wildlife corridors, and educational features that turned our neighborhood into a model for sustainable development. Within 6 months, herons returned to fish in pools that had been concrete. Salamanders reappeared in restored habitat. Kingfishers dove for minnows in water that ran clear over naturally placed stones. The soundscape changed from concrete muffled silence back to the gentle babble of moving water that had been this hillside's voice for centuries. My countersuit against the old HOA board resulted in a $45,000 settlement that I immediately donated to establish the Willowbrook Watershed Education Center. Insurance companies, spooked by federal environmental violations, refused coverage renewals for anyone involved in the creek destruction, creating financial accountability that lasted longer than legal judgments. But the most meaningful change was personal. City planners hired me as a drainage consultant for new developments, paying me to prevent the problems that Brittany's arrogance had created. Turns out, 30 years of plumbing experience, plus documented expertise in environmental restoration, makes you valuable to people who want to avoid federal lawsuits. The Education Center became our neighborhood's crown jewel. Built in the renovated community space, it offered monthly workshops on sustainable landscaping, natural drainage systems, and watershed management. The smell of fresh mulch and growing plants replaced the artificial chemical treatments that had once dominated our landscaping. We established annual scholarships for local students studying environmental science, $5,000 grants funded by settlement money, and ongoing donations from residents who'd learned to value natural systems over manufactured aesthetics. Dr. Kim's students still use our restoration as a case study, bringing classes to see successful watershed management in action. The story spread beyond our neighborhood boundaries. HOA management companies now use our case as training material for what not to do when residents request environmental modifications. Environmental law textbooks cite Rodriguez versus Willowbrook Estates as precedent for federal enforcement of natural waterway protection. The practical legacy lives in the free online guide we created, Homeowner's Guide to Natural Drainage Systems, downloaded over 50,000 times by people facing similar battles against HOA environmental destruction. Real education that prevents problems instead of creating them. But the sweetest victory happens every morning when I sit on my porch with coffee, listening to the creek flow over restored stones. The sound reminds me of Sarah's voice calling water nature's lullaby, and I know she would have loved watching this particular story reach its proper ending.
16 cement trucks at 3 a.m. That's all it took to turn $1 million neighborhood into a federal crime scene. Brittany thought she was playing chess. Turns out, Asa was playing poker, and he's been holding on the cards since day one. When she was writing violation notice for mailbox caller, he was quietly building relationship with county engineer and federal regulators who actually understood how water works. What really happened here wasn't David vs. Goliath, it was expertise vs. arrogance. Asa knew something that's come from actually working with water. It's a way finds the weakness in your system, and it's a way exploits it at the worst possible time. That's $127,000 special assessment per household wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Though federal fines wasn't punishment, they were just a bill coming due for thinking you can conquer over nature, because it doesn't match your suburban fantasy. And Brittany, standing in flood water at 5:23 a.m., screaming at news camera, that was the moment in tidal power meets immutable physics live on television. Makes you wonder, what's the Brittany in your neighborhood eyeing as their next improvement project? Drop your HOA owner stories in the comments. Hit like if you enjoy watching Patient Defeat Panic, and subscribe for more stories about people who understand the difference between authority and expertise. Power without wisdom always drowns in its own concrete.